So at the end of last year, I remember saying what I wanted to see the Browns do in the offseason was two things, right? They needed a new defensive coordinator. They needed a new special teams coordinator. At the very least, Joe Woods had to go. And they did not mess around with that. They got rid of Joe Woods on day one. They just recently got rid of Mike Prefer. But what I wanted, right, when we were having these conversations, right, and I was trying to tell people, like, don't get so caught up in a name because it's going to make you unnecessarily, like, mad when they hire somebody who's not that name, and a lot of people did that with Brian Flores. I wanted to talk about traits of guys that I wanted to add into the main leadership of this coaching staff that I felt like they didn't have. One of the things was a former player. I wanted a former player, and I wanted competency on defense. Now, at the time, we were thinking that this was going to have to come from one guy, the defensive coordinator. And they hired Jim Schwartz, and Jim Schwartz is not a former player, but he has experience in these locker rooms, and he's competent as a defensive coordinator. But then they fired Mike Prefer and added in Ray Ventrone. Ray Bubba Ventrone, he played for the Browns in like 2013, 2014, right before they changed to them ugly jerseys. But that being said, Ray Ventrone is a former NFL player. And look, I know that there are technically former NFL players on the Browns coaching staff, but like they're dudes like Stump Mitchell, who, no disrespect to Stump, always respect the beard, but you know, like Stump ain't played in the NFL in a minute. You know, like he's like before, like he's like 60s, well, not 60s, but like 80s, right? Like I think he played in the 80s. And that's just not relevant enough experience when it comes to how NFL locker rooms work now that it really matters. Like, yes, has he been a coach during all that time? Is he familiar with guys? Yes. But there's a difference between being a authority figure in a locker room during the period of time and being a player in the locker room and knowing what these dynamics are like. And you look throughout the Browns coaching staff, you really don't see anybody who has any recent player experience, really. Like, you know, like Chris Kiffin, Jeff Howard, like none of these dudes were like really there, and none of these guys were in advanced leadership positions with the team. Obviously, Joe Woods never played in the NFL. He was, I think he was a college player. Andrew Berry was a college player. Kevin Stefanski was a college player. And I don't believe Alex Van Pelt played in the NFL. Nah, he ain't playing in the NFL. So, like, not really a lot of former player voices. And one of the things that I had noticed in the Kevin Stefanski era, while I do think he's a good head coach, coaches have flaws, right? And coaches have flaws that they need to be vigilant about in fixing. And one of his flaws as a coach, I don't think really is the play calling or the things that people really complain about. But one of the things that I did think was a flaw with him that he needed to work on was every year he's been head coach, there's been a situation where a player is upset about their role and it becomes a thing. And look, in the NFL, players are upset about their roles all the time, but it's up to the staff, the coaching staff, to be able to handle that in a way that it doesn't really get out. But that hasn't been the case, right? The only year where it kind of happened was 2020, and we only think that because 2020 didn't have that much access to the media. So even if somebody did have a problem, it was during the pandemic. Nobody could really speak to sources unless they really, really, really wanted to, and went out their way to do it. And that just wasn't happening. Guys aren't that thirsty to get this information out. But 2021, when there's access to locker rooms, we found out all these problems, right? Baker Mayfield don't like what he's wanting to do. You got Odell not liking what he did, this and that, right? Just not knowing how to communicate with guys. And then we get to 2022 last year. I mean, Jadeveon Clowney, you pick a guy last year and the year before, there was guys with problems of what they're being asked to do, and how that was being communicated is the most important thing, because you're just going to ask guys to do stuff in the NFL. That is going to be the rule of land, and people aren't going to be happy. That's going to happen all the time. But how these things are communicated is key. And what I have surmised that the Joe Woods, Mike Prefer Kevin Stefanski version of this whole thing sucked at that because time and time again, Kareem Hunt does not like how the change of role is being communicated to him, right? They're not thinking about the people stuff thoroughly enough because they probably just don't have the relevant experience on the staff to be able to ask the pertinent questions that need to be asked when these things pop up, which is like, hey, did we text them first before it dropped? Like, these are the things that guys who have been through it want this to be handled with. And now you have a guy like Jim Schwartz in the room who, when these decisions are being made and when they're talking about how we're going to go about doing this, he's done this as a head coach before. He's done this as a coordinator before. He's been in the league for a long time. He knows how this is done and what's the right way to do it. So I think we'll see less problems there. And then Raven Trone is a guy who's in senior leadership now as a coordinator, not just as an assistant coach, as a coordinator in every room that matters when it comes to what decisions they're going to make. And he's a former player. He's somebody who's been through the process, and he's somebody who can say, hey, I don't think communicating it this way is going to be real helpful because I know if somebody came to my locker and said this to me like this, I would be furious. And I would let people know that I'm that furious. Or I've seen guys react to that in a way that you did not anticipate, right? There was a certain tone deafness when it came to the relationships between the coaching staff and the players that was undeniable the last couple of years, and probably would have been undeniable in 2020 if they hadn't been 11-5 and it hadn't been a pandemic where access to the players was very, very limited. And access to the players to the player, like you just could not talk to each other, right? Like there's a lot of reasons why that's the only season we could point to and go, hey, no problems, because they didn't have a locker room to deal with. Literally in the pandemic year, you just didn't have a locker room to deal with. Guys weren't allowed to be that close to each other and intermingle like that. So that's been the issue. I think the last couple of years is they're good at the game planning stuff. I don't care what anybody says. The offense, like we've achieved remarkable things with not remarkable quarterbacks in the last 3 years with Kevin Stefanski when it comes to what Jacoby Brissett has been able to do, what Baker Mayfield did in 2020 that he has never even come close to replicating any time else in his career. Like that is the stuff that tells me that the X's and O's and all that people complain about, that's really not the problem with the coaching staff, but this stuff has been a problem. And I felt like it was important that they add people to this leadership room that can help fix that problem. Because this happens with a lot of young coaches. It happened with Kyle Shanahan. It happened with Sean Payton when he was young. It happened with Bill Belichick. Let's not forget, Bill Belichick, one winning season out of his first 6 years. And that's not like to say that you should get 6 years of losing before you get fired, right? To know if you're not Bill Belichick. That's to say there was a lot of stuff that Bill knew about football, but not a lot of stuff that Bill knew about how to manage a football team that was hurting his ability to win football games, even though mentally he was capable. It's the people stuff, right? That's my point, is that Kevin, as a football mind, more than capable. More than capable. I have no doubt. Everywhere he's gone, the quarterback play has gotten better. He will probably get Deshaun Watson better. We'll get some career years out of him. We're going to be fine there from an X's and O's standpoint. But if we keep having guys not being happy in this locker room, we keep having guys having issues. And look, we can say as the individual players, we can blame, oh, that's just Odell. Oh, that's just Baker Mayfield. Oh, that's just Davion. They just have stank attitudes. But if it keeps happening in the same locker room, dog, at what point do we say it's the environment that's causing this problem? Because this has been going on for 3-4 years while they've been head coach. So they needed to take the steps to make sure that they don't let these things foster. And I don't care who it is. If you have the right environment, if you have the right structure, you can get almost anybody to be able to understand their role and play it. You can. Antonio Brown really ain't become a problem until he left the Steelers. Like, yeah, he had his issues in Pittsburgh, no doubt, but he didn't become a you can't keep him on the team level problem until he left Pittsburgh, right? Like, that is when it broke down, when he left structure. So that's what I think was most important this offseason, right? I'm tired about hearing about guys not liking their role and not liking how the role's communicated to them. I'm tired of all that. You needed to find a way to fix that. And I think hiring Jim Schwartz and hiring Bubba Raventrone is a great step in that direction, because now you have two guys in there, right? A coordinator, two coordinators, the defensive coordinator and special teams coordinator, that can step up and say something. Because when it's only one guy, he might not feel emboldened enough to say something if he feels it, if he's the only guy in the room that feels that way. But now you have somebody else in there that can help support that. And I think these are the dynamics that rarely get talked about when we talk about coaching and what goes into why a coach can have a successful year and why a coach can have a bad year. These things seldom get talked about. And they get, everything that gets talked about is like the play calling and all that stuff that we really don't know the effect of the game on. And I think this stuff really affects the season way more than all that other stuff, because there have been plenty of geniuses in the NFL that have not found success. You know, Josh McDaniels is a genius, right? Everybody says he's an offensive genius. He can't find success to save his life as a head coach because he's an asshole, right? Like, that's why. Right? Like, you can't be a long-term head coach and be somebody who people regularly recognize as a jerk. There's a certain way you have to kick it. And I'm not saying that Kevin was being recognized as a jerk or any of the coaches on the staff were, but I don't think they were handling some of the people stuff in a delicate enough way that it actually started to protrude their ability to be successful. And I think that's one of the things that they were rubbing up against. Same thing with Bill Belichick, right? Like, you'll hear people who don't play for Bill Belichick say he's a jerk. You never really hear people who played for Bill Belichick refer to him that way, outside of maybe Tom Brady. Like, and Tom Brady's never publicly said that. It's just kind of understood that that's probably how he feels about him. And that's only because they've been together for like 20 years. There's a certain way you had to kick it, right? You know, there's a reason why Greg Williams can't keep a job as a defensive coordinator, let alone a head coach, because people don't like working for that dude, right? Like, and if people don't like working for you, you're not going to keep your job. You know, and you got to create an environment to where people feel heard, people feel understood, and people feel like they're being cared about. And I think one of the things that the Browns failed at was, I think people felt like they were a part of this mathematical equation at times with the Cleveland Browns instead of a part of a football team. And that was something I think that was holding him back. Bringing in Jim Schwartz, who understands the analytics, will use the analytics and all of that, but also understands the people side of this game, will help you. I think bringing in Bubba Ventrone, who is a former player, probably understands the people stuff too. He's been a great special teams coach. And I always felt like what makes a great special teams coach, because if you listen to guys who played in the league, you listen to guys who played for the Ravens, when they talk about what John Harbaugh is good at, and what John Harbaugh has always been good at is his communication. Now, not so much lately with the whole Lamar thing, but his communication has always been what people have praised about him when he was at the top of his run as a head coach, because that's what you have to be as a special teams coordinator. Because think about what that job is as a special teams coordinator. You're not breaking new ground with schemes. You're not like drawing up plays that nobody's ever heard before. Special teams is special teams, because you only have so much time to teach special teams, because the dudes that are going to play special teams don't even know they're going to play special teams when they start camp. So it's not like a complicated position to coordinate. Where it's complicated is in its relationships with people, because you have to convince somebody who is first team all Big Ten or first team all ACC or first team all SEC starter for 3 years, you know, a dog, that now he ought to be one of them dudes that runs down on punts and tackles. That's not an easy job. That's not an easy job. You know what I mean? To get somebody who's used to being a star and get them to take a role. It's not an easy job. That takes a lot of good communication. That takes a lot of people skills. And that takes a lot of understanding and being able to just be able to communicate the circumstances to an individual on why it would behoove them to play special teams. Because it's not something anybody who makes it to the NFL wants to do. Nobody grew up trying to be on punt or return team. Everybody grew up that's in the NFL trying to play as hard as they can, so they ain't got to be on the special teams, right? Because the special teams is for the dudes who could barely play. You got to do something with them. That's a difficult thing to convince NFL players to do. And if you're good at that, you probably have great people skills. And I think not only is Bubba Ventrone a good coordinator at the position, but he's also a great people person at the position. Younger guy, you add some youth to that coaching staff as well. And I think this is I think you could not have done better. You might have been able to do just as good, but I don't think you could have done better than what the Browns did this offseason with their 2 coordinator hires. I'm extremely happy with it. And I just wanted to talk to you guys about that. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Everybody have a great day. Have a good night.